Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. A remarkable 3-day test in Bahrain. Mercedes end the week with the fastest lap times of anyone, but George Russell is convinced it's Red Bull with the fastest car by a long way right now in Formula 1. Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc seem to disagree. They both believe there is a lot more performance from that Mercedes that we have not seen just yet. Massive drama on these regulations from top to bottom that we will get into as well. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Formula 1 is well and truly back. We have a ton of interesting storylines to get into. This was Lando Norris after yesterday's test session. He talked about a few things. He's mentioning Ferrari as a team to watch. They're not massively being discussed. All the drama is on Red Bull, it's on Mercedes. To some degree, it's on Aston Martin having another stinker. We'll talk about that in the coming minutes. McLaren, to a certain extent, they seem to be in the ballpark. But Ferrari, Norris said, they are really strong. There was actually someone from one of the teams who said after Barcelona it looked like Mercedes were well and truly very clear. After Wednesday it looked like Red Bull had it under wraps. After Thursday it looks like all of a sudden Ferrari might be the best team. Who knows where we are after today? Lando, though, says, after doing all that Grand Prix running, look, everyone is playing the underdog gimmick. Everyone is playing it down. There is probably part of that is engine related. The teams that have the Mercedes power unit don't want that to get nerfed with the compression ratio stuff. Lando says no. He did some Grand Prix simulations, he did plenty of lap running, but it wasn't enough as far as they're concerned compared to what Ferrari were able to do. But Lando also said a couple of other things. Leclerc talked about the sensations of these cars. So we have had Lewis Hamilton say the cars are ridiculously complex. He doesn't like this, at least the battery management part of the regulations. The reality is, these drivers nowadays are not driving F1 cars, they are playing Battery Management Simulator. That is how it appears. It has been that way to a small extent over these last few years. But these new regulations are as bad as it's ever been. Leclerc says he's not a huge fan of these cars. Verstappen was furious, really, with the way that they drive yesterday. We saw some reaction to that, we'll see some more in a second. And Alonso says the role of the driver is dying with these new cars, and his comments on how are very interesting. Now look, do I massively care what the drivers think? Are they fun or not fun to drive? As long as it's good for the viewers. No, if the drivers aren't a big fan, the ground effect era that we just had, the drivers understandably weren't a big fan of it because they were so stiff, they're ruining their spines. You know what? Fair enough, I get that complaint, but also if it works for the fans, it kind of is what it is. However, if it's bad for the drivers don't like it, they're complaining about it, and it's bad for the viewers as well, which I think it probably will be, based on what we have seen so far, then we have to have a serious conversation. Now, Lando responds to Verstappen's comments and says, look, we get paid a ridiculous amount of money to drive these cars. You can't really complain. Sometimes F1 is better, sometimes it's worse. He says it was a lot of fun. Every driver can do something different. It's a challenge, but I can still drive cars, travel the world and have fun. Nothing to complain about. Effectively, if Max wants to quit, he can quit. That's what he said. If Max wants to retire, he can retire. It's not like he has to be here, or any driver has to be here. Go and race in the Nordschleife if you like. We get paid a stupid amount of money. George Russell actually said, you know what, I get that from Lando. So yeah, Verstappen's welcome to go to the Nordschleife, I guess. So look, here we go. George also talks about the politics of it all, and it's kind of rare to see a driver be quite so blunt about this. These regulations came into play, a huge push on EVs from the EU, and that was a big part of the likes of Audi to come in. As we know, that's got to be a consideration. Everyone knows if it wasn't for the political side of this, we would not have the regulations that we currently have. But this is the type of analysis from Alonso here that is particularly damning on these regulations. He says, last year we took turn 12 at Bahrain flat out at 280 kilometers an hour. That's kind of just coming up to pretty much the end of the second sector. Flat out at 280 kph. Today we go 50 kph slower because we need to save electricity for the straight. Today in turn 12, you can drive the car. The chef in the kitchen could do it. That's what he says. Because effectively, because it's so important to recover energy for the main straight, there's no more pushing to the limit in effectively any scenario. The limit is very different. The limit is now how best can you manage the battery effectively, rather than how balls to the wall you can actually drive the car. I know a lot of people are hearing all this complexity and they're like, look, can we not just give the drivers a naturally aspirated V10 or V8 or something along those lines on sustainable fuels, give them a throttle and a brake and a steering wheel and away you go, right? Like, it doesn't have to be rocket science. But here's Alonso saying that actually taking turn 12 way slower, way under the limit of what the car is capable of, that any of us could theoretically drive. Okay, obviously there's levels to this, but you know what I'm saying. He's saying the chef in the kitchen could drive the car at that speed round that corner. But we are doing it, and he could do it as well, because that's actually the quicker way to get around the lap, because you save a bit of energy there, and therefore you can deploy it on the straight, and that overall is the faster way to get around. I think this is what we will find. The teams will discover what is the optimal strategy for energy deployment around the lap, and then they will effectively try to do that every single lap. And if you as a driver want to override that and use a bit more energy here to maybe get an overtake done, it's going to cost you at some point. However, there is dirty air is a phenomenon, so if you do get a move done, then maybe it invalidates the other guy who's got the perfect energy management strategy, but like, that is what we are racing nowadays. That is what we are going to be seeing on track, and apparently in order to use the overtake button, which gives you more boost if you're within a second of the car in front, you need at least 5 laps worth of recharging to even allow yourself to use it, really. So, look, I don't know what the racing is going to be like. I just wanted to share this clip for you guys. This is the Audi. I've seen similar clips of the Aston Martin as well. Basically, all the cars are like this when they start up. The Mercedes slightly less so. But this is a race start, and you might think, wow, you know, race starts used to be super noisy, like beautiful orchestra of sound in many respects. Well, let me just share this, and then we'll talk about it. So they've got rid of the MGU-H. The MGU-H used to help spool up the turbo, and you can't deploy any electrical energy until you're at least 50 kph, as far as I understand. So the drivers have to play this very strange game of spooling up the turbo to the desired level, getting the revs in the right range, and then also making sure the battery is well prepared. And it seems to be this incredible complexity of the race start. And you can hear it, and it's just, ugh. I mean, there's a lot of backfiring from a lot of the engines that we've heard. Apparently the Mercedes is the exception to that. Not a big fan of that. And to make matters even worse, Charles says that overtaking is basically impossible. Not impossible, impossible in the traditional sense, right? I think we want to see overtakes done with a big late-braking move into a corner, or some sort of ballsy move around the outside. The reality is that overtaking will happen this year, probably will happen quite a lot, but it largely will be, oh, I've got like 20% more energy than this guy, I'm just going to press the boost button and I'm going to fly by him on the straight. That's not even the overtake button, by the way. That's just, they'll be using boost all the time. That might not be the same button, as it were. The boost might just be built in, but the drivers will have ways to play around with that. But are they going to be, you know, at the limit of adhesion, as I think we would like to see? Look, I still go back and watch from time to time the 2021 Saudi Arabian qualifying lap with Max Verstappen, you know, the incomplete lap or whatever they say. That section in the middle of the lap where Brundle goes, whoa, he's leaving no margin out there at all. Up against the walls, Verstappen knows this is it. This is the lap of the weekend. And you can just like, that whole sequence is spectacular. Like, that is Formula One on a Saturday at its very best. I just don't think we're going to get any of that this year and for the coming years with the way that this looks. And overtaking, as he says, because of, well, not only paying a higher price in terms of energy to get past someone, but also what we've heard from the drivers is that the dirty air is not good. Like, it's certainly not any better than it was the last couple of years. So, look, I was expecting these regulations to be, I mean, bad is maybe what I was thinking, but questionable at best. I wanted to stay relatively optimistic, but I mean, look, we talk about F1 on this channel every day. We follow all the developments of the last few years relatively closely. I think it was quite clear there were going to be a ton of problems with these regulations, but is it worse than we thought? Possibly. Certainly no better, I think, is the early suggestion. The reality is the best car will win, more than likely. And there will be a driver association with that, right? The best driver will still win, and there will still be elements where the driver can make a difference. They're just making a difference in a very different way, maybe, to where that has been in the past. But where do the cars sit? Because at the end of the day, the team that wins the championship is going to be pretty happy about these regulations. Verstappen says he's not having fun. Toto says the compression trick is worth 1 or 2 horsepower. Max says you're missing a 0, mate. It's more like 10 or 20, maybe more. And the guys at Auto Racer say that the general belief in the paddock is that Mercedes have about 25 horsepower in reserve they are not currently deploying. Now, that could be the same story for other teams as well, maybe to a lesser extent. 25 horsepower is a lot. The theory went that if they were using the compression trick for get from 16 to 18, that was worth roughly 13, 15 horsepower, and that might be 4 tenths a lap, 5 tenths a lap. So 25 horsepower. Certain tracks, you could be talking a second of lap time in performance that Mercedes are currently leaving on the table. But obviously everyone is leaving some level of performance on the table right now. So who knows where the teams really stand? We also know that Red Bull, they're also playing the underdog game. They're playing down their potential. Apart from Isaac Hadjar, who says that when he was asked, is this the car that will win you your first race? And he said, yes, it will. So he's confident that the RB22 is very good. He was even saying that he is massively impressed with the engine that Red Bull powertrains have produced. It's way better than he expected. And if George is right, that they have the advantage that they seemingly do based on the telemetry over the first few days of this test in Bahrain, then surely they must have found something that others haven't found. I think that's the conclusion to me here. But George says Red Bull's performance is very concerning. Their engine looks a step above everybody else. You're not talking a small step ahead. You're talking half a second to a second a lap in terms of the amount of extra deployments they're able to generate. It's pretty scary to see that advantage. Now, look, I don't really know if I believe this, how close Mercedes might be to that when they really turn everything up to the max, but presumably Red Bull aren't at the max themselves yet either. I guess we shall see. But if they really are half a second to a second a lap ahead on pure electrical deployment, effectively is what it looks like, they must have found something with the MGUK or the ability to harvest or whatever that others haven't found, because you would not expect Red Bull to be able to get that much of a head up on certainly Mercedes and arguably on Ferrari and others as well. So it's still very difficult to judge this, but George is adamant. Red Bull are the team to beat. When we go to Melbourne, we will only have 3 hours of practice. Looking at the Barcelona and Bahrain data, it seems Red Bull will start the season ahead. We have a lot of work to do. And then, talking half a second to maybe a full second a lap. Again, as I say, if Mercedes do have 25 horsepower in reserve, that nullifies that. And it's very difficult to say where the teams currently sit. Russell says I think this is part of the politics game, let's be honest. Russell knows what he's doing here. There's all this talk about the compression ratio nerfing Mercedes. Now Russell is saying, maybe it's time to nerf Red Bull. Their engine is too strong. All these rumours about the power unit, that came from Red Bull. Maybe they wanted to divert the attention elsewhere, which, we understand that could be true, right? The rumour was that Red Bull were the ones who leaked it publicly and got this compression ratio stuff out there in the public, having this whole philosophy that, Mercedes obviously must be the best team for whatever reason. And now Mercedes are fighting back in the politics game. It's pretty funny because Laura McKees not long ago said, we're going to be a good-natured team. We're no longer under the Horner era. We're not the same team anymore. We want to do our racing properly on the track and all this. But no, you know how it is. To some extent, it's still the same people over there at Red Bull, although some of the big names have left. And in many respects, they're still the same team, playing the same politics games that they always would have done under Horner and Marco. So we're seeing it again. Mercedes are piping it back their way as well. George says that their power unit is absolutely unbeatable, but Pierre Wache, of course their top engine guy, or the top aero guy, says according to our analysis, Ferrari, Mercedes and McLaren are currently ahead of us. We're right behind. So he says that they're fourth. Again, I think he's not telling the full story here either. We could be wrong. We don't know the fuel load or the engine mode of the other teams. So Red Bull say that they're only fourth, Mercedes say that Red Bull are first by an absolute mile, Leclerc says that you have no way to tell because in previous years we talk about fuel, we talk about engine mode and all this, but now because of all the additional electronic complexity, Leclerc says there's about 15 ways that you can hide performance, so it's pretty much impossible to say where the teams really are. However, Ferrari, having not got that much press, they look to be in a pretty reasonable position. They don't seem to have a massively complex car. That's like the first thing to note. It seems that it's a relatively straightforward design, at least initially. But that seems to be working rather well for them. And there will be plenty of upgrades in the works for Ferrari. The question always with Ferrari is, will the upgrades actually work? But right now, things look really pretty good for them, especially because of the power unit. Vasseur says we did like 4,000 kilometers without major issues, and our understanding is they did all of that running on a single power unit. From the pre-season even briefly in Fiorano, then the pre-season in Barcelona where they did a ton of running, and now the entirety of this test in Bahrain. Apparently that Ferrari car has had the same power unit the whole time. And no other team has managed that. Even Mercedes had to make a change, as we saw. So that is impressive in terms of reliability, and they're pumping in pretty good lap times as well. That cannot be said, however, for Aston Martin. So we've got to do a little aside on what's been happening at that team. This is Adrian Newey himself getting down to work on a couple of things on the car. There's different messaging on what exactly is happening there. They expected to be behinds. They did not expect it to be this bad. The question has been, did Newey and the aero team push too hard in terms of the cooling requirements and the packaging of the car? Did Honda promise too much? Or how has that all transpired? But it does seem that that relationship has caused problems. Apparently the gearbox is also not an ideal case right now that's making the car basically undrivable. So they've got a lot of issues that Aston Martin have to work through. There was some talk that actually, no, the cooling is fine. The cooling is okay, it's more chassis integration, the aero is working well. But again, there's obviously an engine problem coming up there somewhere. They did reach some higher speeds, some higher RPMs today that looked more in line with what some of the other teams have done. But apparently when the Honda engine reaches high RPMs, it vibrates too much, which affects the sensors and the crankshaft. So again, it might not be a cooling issue. Newey's packaging might be perfectly reasonable given Honda's expectations, but the engine itself is frankly problematic, which isn't a huge shock. Honda effectively spun up their engine project from scratch again after they stopped working in Formula 1 with Red Bull and everything like that. But Alonso can't get away from it, can he? So lots of work for them to do before next weekend. This was Hamilton stopping on track, actually, in the Ferrari at the end of the day. But interestingly enough, the reason why he stopped was because Ferrari deliberately ran the car down to zero fuel. So he did a race run. They then decided to effectively run it dry just to see if their calculations lined up with where he actually ran out of fuel and where he stopped. So that was interesting. It's, well, people thought, oh my God, 9 minutes left. It's Ferrari's first engine problem of the whole season. But no, it was part of the plan as far as we understand. We do have some timings for some of the race run stints. Again, I'm not going to discuss this in great detail because it's just really difficult to properly analyse. And as Leclerc says, there are just so many variables. In the second stint, Antonelli was looking at like a 1:38 mid. Ferrari and Lewis were a little bit behind that. Oscar was a little bit behind that in the McLaren. But again, fuel loads, engine modes, all these other things. And we usually talk engine modes. As Leclerc says, there's far more to it now than just engine mode. These were the numbers, though, of the day. There was a lot of laps put in. Hamilton put in 100, and I think he had nearly enough 150 towards the end. Piastri did a similar number. Colapinto wasn't far behind. Lawson did a good stint today as well. Some of the teams, of course, shared their drivers, as is sometimes the case. That was also the case at Mercedes, but they topped the timesheet in all regards. So Antonelli did the fastest lap time of the entire test so far with a 1:33.6. Russell was fastest in the morning with a 1:33.9. Hamilton was really the only man to get particularly close to either of those two lap times. But yes, impressive single lap pace on paper. Again, what does it really mean? We just don't really know. Leclerc says, Red Bull showed a little bit more than Mercedes. They have been very impressive, but I think Mercedes is hiding a massive amount. Only time will tell how much they have been hiding. Verstappen actually said that, look guys, when you turn up to Australia, then we'll really see what they've got going on. This is what he said. For me, it's more of a distraction tactic. We will wait for Melbourne and see how much power they have. I would add a 0 to the end of the rumoured difference he's talking about. He thinks that when Mercedes really turn up for real, it's going to be a very different story. Leclerc, as we know, says a similar thing. How much of this is based on reality? How much of this is just based on expectation? Because there was a feeling that Mercedes must be ahead, not even in Barcelona, but even before the season really began at all, before Barcelona test even happens. So is this based on data from Ferrari and from Red Bull that they believe Mercedes have something in reserve? Or are Mercedes right that actually they don't really, and that they're playing catch up to Red Bull right now? Look, this is Formula 1, ladies and gentlemen, and as much as the racing this year, and from a driver's perspective, it may not be a good formula, it doesn't appear that it will be, it doesn't mean that there's not going to be plenty of talking points. And as Fred Vasseur says, what is good is that no one's talking about us. We can focus on ourselves and go again next week. So very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care. And I'll see you next time.